The ballroom in downtown Dallas glittered with polished confidence. Crystal chandeliers reflected against marble floors. Champagne glasses chimed softly. Investors from Houston, Austin, and North Dallas clustered in tailored suits, discussing capital as casually as weather. At the center of it all stood Thompson, calm, composed, certain. 7 years of expansion, 7 years of reputation, 7 years of marriage. Joan stood beside him in emerald silk, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. She wasn't clinging to his arm. She wasn't scanning the room for approval. She was simply present. An investor approached them with a bright smile. "Thompson, your growth model in logistics this year has been impressive. Smart positioning. Appreciate that," Thompson replied smoothly. The investor glanced at Joan. "And what keeps you busy?" Joan opened her mouth to answer. Thompson answered first. "She enjoys philanthropy and lifestyle management." The words were delivered lightly, almost affectionate. The investor nodded politely. Lifestyle management. Joan felt the phrase settle in the air between them. She managed capital. She structured acquisitions. She negotiated equity positions in companies that didn't even exist when Thompson first inherited his firm. But in that room, she organized luncheons. She smiled. Controlled, elegant. The investor shifted conversation back to Thompson, who continued speaking about scalability models and market confidence. Joan stood still. Peak had arrived quietly, not with shouting, not with disrespect loud enough to protest, just reduction. And sometimes that cuts deeper. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should know you best? Have you ever sat beside the person who vowed to honor you and felt smaller in their presence? Have you ever realized that love can exist without full respect? Because underestimation doesn't always look like insult. Sometimes it sounds like a soft introduction. Sometimes it's wrapped in charm. Sometimes it's delivered by your own husband. And tonight, in a ballroom full of cameras and polished applause, Joan realized something had shifted, not in the room, in her marriage. Welcome back to Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. And before we go any further, if you've ever been underestimated, comment "I know my worth" below. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Now stay with me, because what happened in that ballroom changed everything. The music softened as Thompson moved toward a small stage. The anniversary event was his idea. 7 years of corporate expansion. Investors flown in. Media invited. City officials seated near the front. 7 years. The symbolism was intentional. Joan remained near the front row as Thompson took the microphone. Tonight, he began, we celebrate alignment, vision, strategic execution. Alignment, the word carried weight. He spoke about growth metrics, acquisitions, partnerships. The crowd nodded in appreciation. And none of this, Thompson continued smoothly, would have been possible without the support of my wife. Polite applause. He gestured toward Joan. She has stood beside me every step of the way. Beside, not with. Beside, support, not strategy. The room clapped warmly. Joan stood gracefully. She did not flinch, but something inside her stopped shrinking, because she knew something Thompson did not. And timing is everything. After the speech, clusters of investors formed again. A young executive mentioned a rising logistics firm gaining momentum across Texas. I've heard they're outperforming projections quietly, the executive said. Statewide infrastructure plays. Thompson gave a measured smile. They'll need serious backing to scale nationally. Joan took a sip of champagne. Serious backing. The phrase lingered. Across the ballroom, a large presentation screen flickered unexpectedly. The lighting dimmed slightly. A representative stepped onto the side stage. Good evening. We appreciate the opportunity to share an important expansion announcement. Thompson turned, mildly curious. So did the room. The company logo appeared on the screen. The same logistics firm that had just been discussed. Charts followed. Revenue projections, state contracts, growth maps expanding beyond Houston into Austin and Dallas corridors. Murmurs of interest moved through the room. Thompson folded his arms. Analytical. Then the slide changed. Ownership breakdown. Major equity stakeholder, Joan. Her name filled the center of the screen in clean, undeniable lettering. The room did not gasp. It shifted. Investors recalculated silently. Heads turned. Not dramatically, but deliberately. Some looked at Joan. Some looked at Thompson. Thompson did not move at first. He stared at the screen, then at Joan, then back at the screen. The presentation continued calmly, outlining early-stage funding rounds entered years prior, before he called her comfortable, before he said she lacked visible ambition, before he questioned alignment. The valuation appeared. Comparable, independent, legitimate, not symbolic, not decorative, real, not with chaos, with documentation. Investors approached Joan now, not cautiously, curiously. You entered pre-expansion? One asked. Yes, she replied evenly. You modeled state contract movement? Yes. You anticipated regulatory shifts? I studied patterns. Her tone remained calm. She did not look toward Thompson for validation. She did not look triumphant. She looked prepared. Across the room, Thompson stood still. He had built a career reading markets, but he had failed to read his wife. An older investor approached Thompson gently. I didn't realize Joan was involved in logistics. Thompson forced a polite expression. Yes. It appears she is. Appears, as if he were discovering a stranger, because in some ways he was. The presentation concluded to measured applause. Investors shifted positions again, this time orienting toward Joan. Thompson watched carefully, not angry, not embarrassed in the theatrical sense, unsettled. For 7 years, he believed he was the primary architect of their life. Tonight, he discovered he had married an equal, and equality requires humility. Joan stood beneath the chandeliers, composed. She hadn't announced her investments. She hadn't corrected him publicly. She had simply allowed truth to stand on its own, because numbers don't need defending. They confirm. Stay with me, because this wasn't about money. It was about perception. It was about what happens when someone mistakes silence for dependence. It was about what happens when ambition doesn't announce itself loudly. And it was about a man who believed he built everything, until he realized he had married someone who never needed him to succeed. If you're still watching right now, press like. It helps YouTube push stories like this to people who need perspective. And comment below. Do you think Thompson saw her clearly before this moment? Because the terrace conversation that followed changed their marriage forever. Before the ballroom, before the chandelier, before her name appeared on a screen in clean corporate lettering, there was Houston, South Side. Heat that pressed against your skin like it had something to prove. Music floating from open windows on Saturday mornings. Laughter louder than air conditioners fighting the Texas sun. Joan grew up where people spoke directly and loved loudly. Church on Sundays wasn't optional. It was expected. The choir didn't perform. They testified. Fridays meant spades at folding tables and debates about barbecue techniques that sounded like courtroom arguments. Cookouts started at noon and ended when someone pulled out dominoes and old stories that had grown more dramatic with each retelling. Money wasn't the center of conversation. Character was. Her aunties believed in presentation. Stand straight, one would say. The world decides about you in seconds. Her uncles believed in competence. No more than the room, one once told her, even if you don't say it. Joan listened. She always listened. While cousins chased trends, she studied patterns. At 16, she began reselling thrift finds online, not loudly, not bragging, just testing systems, learning margins, understanding demand. At 18, while others were comparing sneakers, Joan was reading financial blogs at night. At 21, she made her first investment. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. She had saved consistently from small flips and side consulting projects she built while finishing school. She studied market movement. She tracked emerging technology sectors. She analyzed risk like it was a language. Then she moved. No announcement. No applause, just execution. When the investment doubled over time, she didn't celebrate publicly. She reinvested. That was her rhythm. Houston taught her dignity. Curiosity taught her strategy. By 28, Joan was polished without becoming distant. She wore elegance lightly. She didn't flash logos. She didn't posture. She understood something many wealthy people forget. Visibility is optional. Stability is not. North Dallas was different. Where Jones' neighborhood debated barbecue, Thompson's discussed portfolio positioning, country club memberships, legacy conversations before dessert, polished lawns, gated entrances, controlled environments. Thompson inherited his father's investment firm at 33. By 39, he had expanded it through aggressive tech acquisitions. Business magazines called him disciplined, strategic, vision-focused. He had never struggled financially. He had competed professionally. There's a difference. He moved through rooms with calm assurance, not arrogance, at least not obvious, just certainty. And he believed he admired simplicity, or at least he thought he did. 7 years ago, Houston charity art event. High ceilings, abstract canvases, donors circulating with quiet calculation. Jones stood in front of a large painting, studying the brush strokes with narrowed focus. Thompson noticed her because she wasn't trying to be noticed. No camera positioning, no strategic laughter, no hovering near donors. She looked like she was decoding something. He approached. "What do you see?" he asked casually, nodding toward the painting. She didn't turn immediately. "Someone who had money but no peace," she replied. Thompson blinked. "That specific?" She glanced at him, then calm, direct. "Look at the strokes. Aggressive. That's not a calm person." He smiled faintly. "You always analyze strangers through art? Only when the art tells on them." He laughed, not because it was charming, because it was sharp. He extended his hand. Thompson, Joan. Their handshake wasn't lingering. It was steady. "What do you do, Joan?" he asked. "I pay attention," she replied. He tilted his head. "That's not a job description. It's useful." He studied her differently then. Most women at events like that complimented his watch or his firm's recent press feature. Joan had not asked what he owned. She asked what he thought. 40 minutes passed. They debated market psychology through the lens of art pricing. They discussed why collectors sometimes confuse rarity with value. "You talk like someone who studies capital," Thompson said. "I talk like someone who studies people," Joan replied. "And which is more profitable?" She smiled faintly. "Depends on timing." Their first date lasted 4 hours, not because of extravagance, because of conversation. They started at a modern restaurant in Houston Heights. Thompson ordered wine confidently. Jones scanned the menu. "You picking something safe?" he asked. "I don't order safe," she replied. "I order good." He laughed. "Fair." Midway through dinner, Thompson asked, "Do you ever think about scaling up?" "In what sense?" "Visibility. Influence." She sipped her drink calmly. "Influence without foundation collapses. You sound like an investor. I sound like someone who doesn't like losing." He studied her more closely then. "You don't seem impressed," he said lightly. "With what?" "Me." Joan tilted her head. "I don't know you yet." Honesty unsettles confident men, but Thompson found it refreshing. By the third date, he was fascinated. By the sixth, he believed he had found something rare. She didn't orbit him. She met him. When Thompson visited Houston's South Side for the first time, he tried not to look out of place. Music from open windows, smoke from grills drifting over lawns, laughter that wasn't curated. Joan introduced him, simply. "This is Thompson." Her uncle eyed him thoughtfully. "You eat ribs?" Thompson hesitated. "I can't." "You can, or you do." Joan hid a smile. "I do," Thompson corrected. They handed him a plate without ceremony. Sauce dripped onto his cuff. Joan watched carefully. He didn't complain. He adjusted. Later, sitting in folding chairs under a shade tree, he leaned toward her. "You grew up strong," he said quietly. "I grew up aware," she corrected. "Of what?" "That comfort can disappear." He nodded slowly. In that moment, he admired her grounding. What he didn't realize then was that grounding wasn't dependence. It was preparation. When they married within a year, they blended both worlds intentionally. Gospel choir at the ceremony, string quartet at the reception. Her relatives danced. His colleagues networked politely. 2 cultures, 1 union. For a while, the balance felt equal. Joan adjusted to country club dinner. Thompson adjusted to loud Sundays. She learned wine pairings. He learned how to eat ribs without confusion. He admired her intelligence. He praised her insight privately. He asked her opinion on acquisitions, and she gave it, not loudly, not forcefully, just Precisely. What Thompson never asked, and Joan never volunteered, was this: what exactly do you own? He assumed. She didn't correct him, not because she feared transparency, because she valued peace. And in the early years, peace felt more important than credit. But assumptions are quiet seeds. They don't demand attention. They grow beneath tone. And as Thompson's public profile expanded, something subtle shifted. He enjoyed being the architect. He enjoyed being seen as the builder. He enjoyed being the primary force. And Joan, who never needed applause, allowed him the spotlight, not realizing that spotlight can distort perspective. Back in the present, ballroom, downtown Dallas, investors recalculating, Joan standing steady, Thompson discovering. 7 years earlier, he saw a woman studying a painting. Tonight he saw a woman who had been studying markets all along, and the difference between admiration and underestimation is often one unanswered question he never asked. The first year of marriage felt intentional, not loud, not performative. Intentional. Joan moved into Thompson's Dallas home without trying to redesign it into something unfamiliar. She didn't erase his structure. She adjusted it. She added warmth without removing order. Sunday mornings, gospel music played softly through the kitchen speakers while she made breakfast. At first, Thompson found it different from his quiet newspaper and espresso routine. "You always cook this much?" he asked one morning, watching her season a skillet confidently. "I cook like people might show up," she replied. "People aren't showing up." She smiled faintly. "That's not the point." He laughed and kissed her temple. He liked that about her. She operated from abundance, not scarcity, and for a while he admired it without analysis. At corporate dinners, Joan learned quickly which fork to use, which investors spoke in signals instead of statements, which smiles were transactional. She didn't shrink. She observed. One evening, at a country club event, a board member asked her, "How are you adjusting to this world?" Joan sipped her water calmly. "Worlds aren't that different," she replied. "Only the packaging changes." The board member blinked, unsure whether to laugh. Thompson squeezed her hand under the table. "You're sharp," he whispered later in the car. "You're surprised?" she asked. "No," he said quickly. "Just impressed." She let that sit. At home, they talked business casually. Thompson paced through the living room one night, reviewing notes about a tech acquisition. "I'm debating whether to move aggressively," he said. "The founder seems confident." "Confidence isn't a metric," Joan replied from the couch. He stopped pacing. "What is?" "Cash flow, consistency, leadership, retention, infrastructure, scalability." He turned slowly. "You think like an analyst." She shrugged. "I think like someone who doesn't enjoy cleaning up mistakes." He smiled. "That's cute." The word floated gently between them. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't mocking. It was light. But light words carry weight when repeated. She didn't react. Not outwardly, but she noticed. As Thompson's firm expanded, so did his visibility. Interviews, panels, magazine features. He began traveling more often to Austin and Houston for corporate meetings. Joan accompanied him when appropriate. At events, she remained composed, not competing for attention, not disappearing either, just present. At one conference in Austin, a moderator asked Thompson about his decision-making process. "I rely on instinct refined by experience," he replied confidently. Afterward, in a private conversation with a small group, someone asked Joan if she ever influenced those instincts. Thompson chuckled lightly. "She offers perspective. I handle execution." Perspective, execution. The hierarchy was subtle, but clear. Later that night, Joan asked calmly, "Do you believe I only offer perspective?" He looked confused. "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean?" "You're thoughtful. I'm aggressive, and thoughtful can't be aggressive?" He paused. "That's not how I see you." "How do you see me?" He smiled faintly. "Balanced." It sounded like praise. It felt like containment. Their home life remained smooth on the surface. Dinners shared, trips taken, inside jokes maintained. They still laughed from their chests sometimes. But something began shifting in tone. Thompson introduced her more often as my wife, Joan. Not Joan, who studies markets. Not Joan, who understands infrastructure. Just proximity. One evening, while preparing for a gala, he adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror. "You know," he said casually, "public perception matters more than people admit." Joan fastened her earrings. "It matters if you need it to," she replied. He studied her reflection. "Would you ever consider building something visible?" She turned slowly. "What makes you think I haven't built something?" He laughed, lightly, assuming humor. "You know what I mean." "No," she said evenly. "Explain." He waved it off. "Just visibility. Foundations. Boards. Something aligned with my growth." Aligned. The word landed again. Marriage as brand alignment. She said nothing further, but she heard it clearly. Months later, during a quiet dinner at home, Thompson scrolled through an industry profile highlighting another CEO and his wife. "She runs a high-profile foundation," he said casually. "Great optics." Joan cut her food deliberately. "Optics? For who?" "For the firm. For perception." "Marriage isn't marketing," she replied calmly. He gave a tight smile. "Everything is marketing." That sentence didn't cause an argument. It caused clarity. And still, she loved him. Love makes room. Love makes patients feel noble. She told herself he didn't mean harm, that his tone wasn't intentional. That ambition can distort language without corrupting intention. But repetition changes meaning. And slowly, subtle phrases became pattern. "You wouldn't understand the risk exposure. I'll handle the negotiation. It's complicated." Each sentence delivered smoothly, each sentence placing her one step further from the center. Not loudly, just incrementally. Back in Houston, when she visited her neighborhood occasionally, the air felt grounding. Music, barbecue smoke, unfiltered laughter. Her cousin once studied her quietly. "You look expensive and tired," her cousin said. Joan laughed softly. "That's a dangerous combination." "You happy?" The question lingered longer than expected. "I love him," Joan replied. "That wasn't my question." Joan stared at the sky. Happiness is quiet when it's secure, but lately hers felt like it was defending itself. Back in Dallas, Thompson planned the corporate anniversary event. 7 years of expansion, 7 years of achievement, 7 years of marriage. He framed it as symbolic. "It'll be big," he said. "Press, investors, city officials, and me?" Joan asked. He smiled faintly. "Of course. You'll be there. Not centered, present, not positioned." She nodded, because at that moment, she understood something clearly. He didn't see her as equal threat. He saw her as elegant support. And the irony? She had never competed. She had simply built silently, patiently, strategically. And so when the ballroom lights dimmed in Chapter 1, Part 1, when her name appeared in clear documentation, when investors recalculated quietly, that moment did not create her power. It revealed it. But before revelation comes realization. And in these early years of marriage, Thompson believed he was the primary architect. He believed she benefited more. He believed her calm meant comfort. He believed her silence meant absence of scale. And she allowed him to believe it. Until he said the sentence that shifted everything. "You think like an analyst. That's cute. Not equal, not formidable, not formidable yet." Dallas. Private dining room. Mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine. Low lighting. Crystal glasses aligned with quiet precision. A curated guest list. Investors, advisors, long-term partners. Thompson stood at the head of the table, relaxed in his element. Joan sat 2 seats to his right. Emerald dress replaced by understated black silk. Hair pulled back. Expression calm, observant. The evening began smoothly. Wine poured. Plates served. Market projections discussed casually between courses. An investor leaned forward. "Thompson, the European market interest. Are you expanding this quarter?" "We're evaluating entry points," he replied confidently. "Timing is everything." Joan listened. She had reviewed European regulatory trends weeks ago. She had notes, risk assessments, timing models. She waited. Another guest turned toward her with a polite smile. "And Joan, what keeps you busy these days?" The question was neutral, open, opportunity. Joan inhaled lightly, preparing to answer. Thompson spoke first. "She enjoys philanthropy and lifestyle management. Soft laughter around the table. Not mocking, polite, affirming. Lifestyle management. Joan felt the word settle like a quiet label pinned to her chest. She placed her napkin neatly on her lap. Philanthropy. She funded early-stage ventures. Lifestyle management. She structured equity positions across Texas. But the room absorbed Thompson's framing, and framing shapes perception. One guest nodded approvingly. Important work. A stable home supports strong leadership. Joan smiled. Controlled, measured. She did not correct him. Not because she agreed, because she understood timing. Thompson continued seamlessly. As I was saying, we're cautious about regulatory volatility. Cautious. Joan's gaze flickered briefly toward him. Cautious. He had once called her analysis cute. Now, he borrowed the language, but he didn't credit the source. The conversation moved toward logistics infrastructure. A younger executive asked, "What's your view on state-level contract friction?" Joan answered before she could stop herself. "It depends on scalability modeling and policy shifts at the county level." The table grew quiet. The executive blinked. "That's specific?" Thompson chuckled lightly. "She reads a lot." A few smiles circled the table. Joan's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. "Reads a lot. Not funds. Not invests. Reads." She looked at Thompson calmly. He didn't notice the weight of what he'd done, because, to him, it was harmless. He believed he was protecting his position. He didn't realize he was shrinking hers. After dessert, the group dispersed into smaller conversations. Joan stepped toward the balcony for air. The Dallas skyline glowed steady and confident. Footsteps approached behind her. "Thompson, you okay?" he asked. "Of course. You went quiet." "I was observing." He smiled faintly. "You always do." She turned slowly. "Why did you introduce me that way?" "What way?" "Lifestyle management." He hesitated. "I didn't mean anything by it." "That doesn't answer the question." He exhaled lightly. "It's simpler." "Simpler for who?" "For the room." "The room can handle complexity," she replied calmly. He studied her expression. "You're overthinking it." "No," she said softly. "I'm noticing it." Silence. A pause that lingered longer than comfortable. He adjusted his cufflinks, an unconscious habit when unsettled. "It's not a competition, Joan." The sentence landed flat. "I never thought it was," she replied. "But it looks like it sometimes." "Looks like what?" "Like you're trying to position yourself." Her eyes didn't harden. They clarified. "I don't position myself," she said evenly. "I prepare." "For what?" "For when it matters." He shook his head slightly. "You don't need to do that." "Need to do what?" "Prove anything?" "I'm not proving anything." "Then why jump into discussions?" She held his gaze. "Because I understand them." The honesty disarmed him briefly. "But pride is resilient. You don't have to carry weight in every room." Her voice remained steady. "I've been carrying weight long before I entered your rooms." He didn't respond, because that part he had never asked about. Driving home, the silence between them wasn't explosive. It was controlled, measured, polished, like everything else lately. At a red light, Thompson spoke again. "It just looks odd sometimes." "What looks odd?" "You contributing like that." "Contributing?" "Yes." "It feels competitive." Joan leaned back in her seat. "Competitive implies I'm trying to take something from you." "You are." "What?" "Attention." She stared at him carefully. "Attention isn't ownership." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You know what I mean." "No," she said softly. "I don't." The light turned green. The car moved forward. So did the tension. At home, the house felt larger than usual. Distance can expand space. Joan removed her heels slowly. Thompson poured himself water, avoiding eye contact. "Do you think I undermine you?" he asked finally. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. He looked up sharply. "That wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional either," she replied. "Then what is it?" "Accurate." He ran a hand through his hair. "I built this life." She studied him carefully. "Yes," she said. "You built yours." The distinction hovered between them. He didn't fully understand it. Not yet. That night, while Thompson slept, Joan opened her laptop. Not dramatically, not angrily, methodically. Her dashboard displayed real estate shares in downtown Houston, commercial property gains, logistics expansion modeling, diversified technology holdings. She reviewed numbers calmly. Numbers don't require validation. They stand. She wasn't dependent. She wasn't decorative. She wasn't supportive infrastructure. She was an independent structure entirely. And she realized something clearly. The problem wasn't money. It was perception. Thompson believed he was the primary architect. He believed she benefited more. He believed her silence meant absence of scale, and he had never investigated further, because he never thought he needed to. The following week, at another networking dinner, it happened again. A guest asked Joan about her professional background. Before she could answer, "She supports our philanthropic initiatives," Thompson said smoothly. Supports. The pattern solidified. Not once, not accidental, consistent. And consistency reveals intention. Joan smiled politely, but something inside her shifted permanently. Love makes you patient, but patience has limits. She did not argue in the car afterward. She did not confront him that night. She did something quieter. She stopped shrinking her language. When investors asked her questions moving forward, she answered directly, without waiting, without permission. And the difference in tone unsettled Thompson more than confrontation ever could, because effortless competence challenges fragile hierarchy. And he had grown accustomed to hierarchy. By the end of that month, Thompson's interviews increased. He leaned more heavily into his public image. Panels, magazine features, board seats. He enjoyed being the smartest person in the room. What unsettled him was realizing there might be someone equally sharp at his own dining table, and instead of asking about it, he minimized it, subtly, politely, professionally. Underestimation rarely shouts. It introduces, again and again. And Joan was beginning to understand that clarity would require visibility. The drive back from the country club was too quiet, not peaceful, controlled. Dallas traffic moved steadily around them, headlights stretching in long lines across the highway. Thompson kept both hands on the steering wheel. Joan sat angled slightly toward the window, watching the city blur past. He broke the silence first. "You didn't have to answer like that." "Like what?" she asked calmly. "At dinner. The contract modeling comment. I answered a question. You corrected me." "No," she said evenly. "I clarified a topic." He exhaled through his nose. It looked competitive. Competitive implies I'm trying to win something. "Aren't you?" She turned her head slowly toward him. "Win what, Thompson?" "The room." She studied his profile carefully. "I don't compete for rooms," she said. "I contribute to them." "That's easy to say. It's also true." He changed lanes abruptly, more force than necessary. "You don't understand how perception works in those spaces." Her voice remained steady. "I understand perception very well." He glanced at her. "Do you?" "Yes. And what do you think the perception is?" "That I'm capable." "That's not the issue." "Then what is?" He hesitated. "It looks like you're positioning yourself." "Positioning myself for what?" "For influence." She didn't blink. "You believe influence belongs to you?" "That's not what I said. It's what you implied." Silence filled the car again, thicker this time. When they arrived home, neither rushed inside. The driveway light flickered on automatically. The house stood pristine, structured, curated. Thompson unlocked the door. Joan stepped inside first. He removed his jacket carefully and draped it over a chair. "Why does it matter so much?" she asked quietly. "What?" "That I answer questions." He leaned against the kitchen counter. "Because it changes dynamics." "Dynamics for who?" "For me." The honesty slipped out before he could filter it. Joan absorbed it. "For you," she repeated. "Yes. And what about me?" He paused. "You don't need to prove anything." She walked toward the dining table and rested her fingertips on its surface. "I'm not proving anything." "Then what are you doing?" "Being competent." He looked at her carefully. "It doesn't look that way." "How does it look?" "Like you're stepping into territory that's mine." The words landed clean. Territory. "Mine?" Joan inhaled slowly. "I didn't realize marriage was territorial." "It's not." "Then what is it?" He ran a hand across his jaw. "Alignment." There it was again. "Alignment?" She met his gaze. "Define alignment." "Shared direction, shared presentation, shared priorities." "And who defines those?" He hesitated. "That's not what I mean." "It is," she replied calmly. "You mean visible support." He straightened slightly. "Support isn't weakness. I never said it was, but you don't seem satisfied with that role." "Role?" she echoed softly. "You know what I mean." "No," she said evenly. "Explain it." He stepped closer. "I'm building something at scale. Publicly. That requires cohesion. And my cohesion requires silence. That's not fair. What's fair? He grew quiet, because fairness was not what he was defending. Control was. The next morning, the tension followed them to breakfast. Thompson read financial headlines aloud from his tablet. European tech consolidation is accelerating, he said casually. Joan buttered her toast. Regulatory volatility will slow that in certain regions, she replied. He lowered the tablet slowly. Again, he said, almost amused. Again what? You inserting yourself. She placed the knife down carefully. Thompson. Yes? I study markets. You read blogs. I own positions. He laughed lightly. You're serious? She held his gaze. Yes. He shook his head. That's cute. The word returned, not as humor, as dismissal. Joan didn't react immediately. She folded her napkin neatly. What part is cute? She asked quietly. You talking like that? Like what? Like you're operating at that level. She didn't raise her voice. I am operating at that level. He leaned back in his chair. You manage investments casually. I manage investments strategically. That's different. Yes, she said. It is. He studied her expression carefully. Why are you pushing this? I'm not pushing anything. It feels like you are. She stood slowly. It feels that way because you've never considered the possibility that I'm not behind you. He frowned. Behind me? Yes. Where are you then? Beside you. The word sat heavy. Beside. Not under. Not dependent. Equal. Later that afternoon, Thompson prepared for an interview with a Dallas business publication. He adjusted his tie while reviewing talking points. Joan sat across from him. What's the headline angle? She asked. Expansion and discipline, he replied. And leadership retention? Covered. Operational risk? Handled. Contract diversification? He paused. Why? Because it strengthens the narrative. He looked at her differently. You really think about this? Yes. He studied her for a moment. Longer than usual. Then something flickered across his expression. Uncertainty, followed by correction. Still, he said, public alignment matters. She leaned back slightly. You've said that 3 times in 2 days. It's important. Why? Because perception builds value, and perception builds ego, she replied calmly. He stared at her. You think this is about ego? I think it's about control. His jaw tightened. You're reading too much into it. No, she said quietly. I'm reading it accurately. That evening, as they prepared for another event, Thompson adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror. You know, he said casually, other executives' wives run foundations, lead boards, build visible enterprises. Joan fastened her bracelet. And it elevates the brand. Our marriage isn't a brand. He turned toward her. Everything is marketing. The sentence landed harder this time. Because it wasn't theoretical, it was personal. She held his gaze through the mirror. Everything? Yes. Even love? He hesitated. That's different. Is it? He didn't answer. Because the truth was uncomfortable. He had started viewing their partnership through optics, visibility, positioning, alignment. She had started viewing it through clarity, respect, recognition, equality. And those frameworks were colliding. That night, Joan lay awake longer than usual. Not upset, not emotional, clear. She replayed the words. Cute. Lifestyle management. Territory. Alignment. Everything is marketing. The pattern was no longer subtle. He didn't see her as incapable. He saw her as non-threatening. And non-threatening felt safe to him until it wouldn't. Downstairs, Thompson sat alone in the living room, reviewing market data, but his focus drifted. He thought about her tone, her calm, her certainty. He had married her because she was different, grounded, intelligent, unaffected by his wealth. But now, when that intelligence surfaced publicly, it unsettled him because it disrupted the narrative, and he had grown comfortable being the architect. He didn't realize she had been building quietly all along. The distance between them didn't explode. It expanded gradually. Conversations became more measured, corrections more frequent, introductions more simplified. My wife, Joan, no qualifier, no acknowledgement, just proximity. And Joan understood something clearly. If respect isn't given voluntarily, it will be revealed by circumstance. And circumstances were approaching. Houston always felt honest. The air was heavier than Dallas, but it didn't pretend to be polished. Music spilled out of open windows without concern for refinement. Barbecue smoke drifted lazily above small houses that had seen generations grow up and move forward. Joan stepped out of her car onto the south side street she knew by memory. The pavement still cracked in the same places. The oak tree near the corner still leaned slightly to the left, like it had something to say. Children ran barefoot across a patch of grass 2 houses down. Someone's speaker played old-school soul at a comfortable volume. She exhaled. Here, nobody introduced her as lifestyle management. Here, she was simply Joan. Her cousin spotted her first. "Well, look at you," her cousin said, walking toward her with an amused grin. "You look expensive and tired." Joan laughed softly. "That's a dangerous combination." They embraced briefly before settling into folding chairs under the shade tree. "You visiting or escaping?" her cousin asked casually. "Visiting," Joan replied. Her cousin tilted her head slightly. "That wasn't what I asked." Joan leaned back in the chair, letting the breeze brush against her face. "You happy?" her cousin asked quietly. The question landed differently here. No crystal chandelier, no investors, no polished language, just directness. "I love him," Joan answered honestly. That wasn't the question. Joan stared up at the wide Texas sky. Happiness used to feel steady, secure. Now it felt conditional. "I'm thinking," she said carefully. "About what?" "Respect." Her cousin studied her closely. "He disrespect you?" "Not loudly." "That's worse," her cousin muttered. Joan gave a faint smile. "He thinks I'm comfortable." "You are comfortable," her cousin replied. "Yes," Joan said calmly, "but not because of him." Her cousin's eyes sharpened. "He don't know." "No." "Why?" "He never asked." Silence settled between them. Then her cousin leaned forward slightly. "You shrinking?" Joan paused. "No." "Good. Because shrinking becomes habit, if repeated long enough." Back in Dallas, Thompson stood in his office reviewing guest lists. The corporate anniversary event would be larger than anything he had hosted before. 7 years of expansion. 7 years of acquisitions. 7 years of growth. He liked symbolism. He liked framing success in narrative. When Joan returned home that evening, he greeted her with measured enthusiasm. "Perfect timing," he said. "I finalized the ballroom in downtown Dallas." "For?" she asked, though she already knew. "The anniversary. It'll be big. Press. Investors from Austin and Houston. City officials." She placed her bag down gently. 7 years, she said. 7 strong years, he corrected. "And what are we celebrating exactly?" "Growth." "In business?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "And in marriage?" He hesitated. "Of course." But the answer felt rehearsed. That night at dinner, Thompson poured wine carefully. "I've been thinking," he said. Joan looked up. That's usually followed by something uncomfortable. He almost smiled. 7 years is a long time. It is. People evolve. Yes. He swirled his glass thoughtfully. Needs shift. The air changed. And she prompted. He exhaled. "I sometimes wonder if we want the same things." She held his gaze steadily. "What do you want, Thompson?" "Expansion. Visibility. Alignment." "Alignment," she repeated calmly. "Yes." "In what sense?" "In the public sense." She waited. "Sometimes," he continued carefully, "I think I could do better in terms of alignment." The sentence did not explode. It settled. Heavy, measured, corporate. Do better. Alignment? She did not flinch. "You think I'm ordinary," she said quietly. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." He leaned back slightly. "I just think we operate differently." "Yes," she replied. "We do. And in my world, our world," she corrected softly. He paused. "In my industry," he adjusted, "public presence matters." "And mine?" He blinked. "What industry?" The question wasn't mocking. It was revealing. She studied him. "You've never asked." He gave a tight smile. "You do consulting?" She did not correct him. Not yet. The following week, tension hovered like a quiet awareness. Neither addressed directly. Thompson attended more events without asking if she wanted to join. He referred to my firm more frequently. At one dinner with colleagues, he introduced her again, simply, "My wife, Joan." No descriptors, no qualifiers. She noticed. On the drive home afterward, she spoke first. "When you say my firm," she asked calmly, "what does that imply?" "That I built it." "You inherited it." He tightened his jaw. I expanded it. I don't dispute that. So what's your point? My point, she said evenly, is that you speak like you are the sole architect of everything around you. And I'm not. Not entirely. He glanced at her. What are you implying? That partnership doesn't require spotlight. He frowned slightly. Is this about the anniversary event? It's about tone. He sighed. You're reading into phrasing. Phrasing reveals belief. He grew quiet. Later that night, Joan opened her laptop again. Her real estate shares in downtown Houston had doubled in value. The logistics startup she funded years ago was entering expansion talks across 3 states. Her diversified technology positions remained strong. She didn't check these numbers for reassurance. She checked them for confirmation. She was not comfortable because of him. She was comfortable beside him, and the distinction mattered. 2 days before the anniversary event, Thompson stood in their living room reviewing his speech draft. He read aloud, 7 years of disciplined execution and strategic growth. Joan listened. And none of this would be possible without alignment. The word again. Alignment. She set her tablet down. Do you think alignment requires visibility? She asked. Yes. Or humility? He paused. Both. And if one partner has been visible and the other hasn't, then it creates imbalance. She met his eyes. Imbalance for who? For the audience. And what about inside the marriage? He looked away briefly. That's different, is it? He didn't answer. Because the truth was uncomfortable. He believed he could do better. Not because she lacked intelligence, because she lacked public positioning. He confused visibility with value, and she was done correcting him verbally. Sometimes clarity requires exposure. The night before the event, as they prepared for bed, Thompson spoke again. I didn't mean that the way it sounded. The alignment comment? Yes. How did you mean it? I meant compatibility. She watched him carefully. We're compatible, she said softly. Are we? Yes. In private, he replied. There it was, private. As if partnership was insufficient, without applause. She lay down beside him. Good night, Thompson. He stared at the ceiling long after she closed her eyes, because something in her tone had shifted. Not defensive, not pleading, certain. And certainty unsettles control. In Houston, Joan's cousin had asked one question. You happy? In Dallas, Thompson had asked another. Aligned? Between those 2 questions lay the fracture, and fractures don't appear suddenly. They reveal themselves under pressure. The ballroom was approaching. The anniversary speech was written. The guest list confirmed. Thompson believed he was celebrating 7 years of leadership. Joan understood something different. She was about to celebrate recognition. The house in Dallas had not changed. The furniture remained deliberate. The walls still displayed framed achievements. The lighting still softened every corner in the evening. But something in the air felt rearranged, not hostile, structured, polite. Thompson's schedule expanded over the next several weeks. More interviews, more panels, more board appearances. He began using phrases like market dominance and legacy, positioning more frequently. Not just in interviews, but at breakfast. Joan noticed the shift. Less curiosity, more certainty. Less partnership, more narration. One morning, he stood near the kitchen island, reviewing notes for a televised panel. They're going to ask about long-term infrastructure exposure, he said without looking up. Joan sipped her coffee. Then address scalability beyond state lines, she replied calmly, and preempt regulatory hesitation. He paused briefly, then nodded. Already covered. She knew it wasn't, but she didn't press. He glanced at her. You really like weighing in. I really like accuracy. A faint smile crossed his face. Controlled, polite. It's not your industry. She held his gaze. Markets don't belong to individuals. They belong to experience. And what do you think I've been doing for years? She asked. He didn't answer directly. He adjusted his tie. I just don't want you stepping into something unnecessarily. Unnecessarily, she repeated. Yes. It complicates perception. Perception again. Not truth, not substance. Perception. At events, the tone sharpened. Thompson began arriving earlier, leaving later. He positioned himself strategically within rooms. Photographs with city officials, conversations with emerging tech founders, interviews highlighting his independent growth narrative. Independent. Joan noticed that word too. At one reception in Austin, a local reporter approached them. Thompson, how important has family support been in your eyes? He smiled smoothly. It's helpful to have stability at home. The reporter turned to Joan. And what do you contribute to that stability? Before she could answer, she keeps everything running, Thompson said lightly. Keeps everything running. Like a background operation, not a parallel force. Joan smiled, measured. She didn't correct him, but she felt something shift permanently inside her. He wasn't minimizing accidentally anymore. He was framing intentionally. Later that night in their hotel suite, she stood by the window overlooking downtown Austin. Thompson removed his jacket carefully. You seemed distant, he observed. I was thinking about language, he exhaled. Not this again. Yes, she replied softly. This again. He loosened his tie. Joan, you don't need to build something to prove you matter. I already built something. He gave a brief, dismissive laugh. You manage investments casually. I manage equity positions strategically. He turned toward her fully now. In what capacity? She met his gaze without hesitation. As principal. The word hung between them. Principal, not assistant, not hobbyist. Principal. He studied her expression. You're serious. Yes. He waited for elaboration. She offered none, because the explanation would come publicly, not in private. And that difference mattered. Back in Dallas, the corporate anniversary event approached quickly. Thompson rehearsed his speech in the living room, several evenings in a row. 7 years of disciplined execution. He read aloud. 7 years of strategic growth. He practiced pacing, tone, timing. Joan sat quietly on the sofa, reviewing her own numbers on her tablet. Her commercial property in downtown Houston had appreciated significantly. Her early-stage logistics funding had entered formal expansion talks. Her tech positions remained diversified and stable. She was not reacting emotionally. She was aligning practically, not with his brand, with her clarity. One evening, Thompson paused mid-speech rehearsal. You don't seem excited. For you? Yes, I am, she said evenly. You don't sound like it. Excitement doesn't always raise its voice. He stared at her for a moment. Do you think I'm wrong? About what? About alignment. She closed her tablet slowly. I think you equate visibility with value. And you don't? No. Then why does it matter so much to you? It matters because you assume I lack it. Silence. He looked away briefly. I don't assume you lack value. You assume I lack scale. That's different. No, she said calmly. It isn't. The emotional distance didn't explode into argument. It solidified into formality. They still shared meals, still attended events, still slept in the same bed. But conversation shifted from partnership to positioning. Thompson no longer asked her opinion before interviews. He informed her, I'll be on a panel Thursday. I'm meeting investors Friday. Statements, not discussions. And Joan stopped volunteering insight unless directly asked, not out of pettiness, out of observation. If he wanted alignment defined by silence, she would give him silence, and let truth introduce itself later. 2 nights before the anniversary event, Thompson received a congratulatory message from a prominent Dallas business figure. He read it aloud proudly. Visionary leadership, the message said. He smiled faintly. You see? He said. See what? Joan asked. Recognition. She nodded. Recognition is earned. Yes. By execution. Yes. And execution requires capital. He hesitated. Yes. And capital requires foresight. He studied her carefully. You're making a point. I'm stating a fact. He walked closer. What exactly are you building, Joan? She met his eyes. Something real. He almost smiled. That's vague. It's strategic. He waited for more. She gave none, because revelation works best when documented. That night, after he fell asleep, Joan reviewed the logistics expansion announcement draft one final time. The presentation slide was clean, professional, clear. Ownership, breakdown, major equity stakeholder, Joan. No theatrics, no exaggeration, just truth. She closed the laptop slowly, not with revenge, with resolve, because this was not about proving him wrong. It was about correcting perception. The next day at lunch, Thompson mentioned something casually. You know, he said, people are watching. Watching what? She asked. Our brand. She held his gaze. You keep using that word because it matters. Does marriage feel like branding to you? He hesitated. It's representation. And what do you represent? Success. And what do I represent? He paused. Stability. She smiled faintly. Only stability? He didn't respond, because stability was safe, predictable, non-threatening. He had mistaken her calm for absence of ambition, her patience for lack of scale, her silence for simplicity, and the anniversary event would test those assumptions publicly. On the morning of the ballroom event, Thompson stood before the mirror adjusting his tie. "Tonight is important," he said. "It is," Joan agreed. "For both of us." "Yes," she replied softly. He glanced at her reflection. "You look confident." "I am." "About what?" "Timing." He frowned slightly. "Timing of what?" She smiled gently. "You'll see." For the first time, uncertainty crossed his expression without being masked by polish, because something in her tone carried weight. Not anger, not challenge, certainty. And certainty is difficult to control. The ballroom awaited. The speech was rehearsed. The guests confirmed, the slides prepared. Thompson believed he was stepping into celebration. Joan understood. She was stepping into clarity, and clarity changes everything. 2 nights before the anniversary event, the house felt unusually quiet, not peaceful, measured. Thompson sat at the dining table, reviewing printed copies of his speech. He had underlined key phrases in blue ink. 7 years of disciplined execution, strategic foresight, alignment, alignment again. Joan stood at the kitchen counter, closing her laptop after reviewing updated numbers from the logistics expansion team. Everything was confirmed, documentation finalized, presentation approved, timing locked. Thompson cleared his throat. "I added something to the speech." She looked up calmly. "What?" "A section about evolution." She walked toward the table slowly. "Evolution, yes. Growth isn't just about business. It's about recognizing when direction changes." She studied him carefully. "Direction of what?" "Life, partnerships, vision." Her voice remained steady. "Say it clearly." He leaned back in his chair. "I sometimes wonder if we're still aligned." The word again. "You keep using that word like it's neutral," she said quietly. "It is." "No," she replied. "It isn't." He tapped the paper lightly. "Public life requires cohesion." "Public life," she repeated. "Yes. And private life? That's different." "How?" He hesitated. "Private life is about support." "Support," she said. "Yes. And what is public life about?" "Leadership." "And leadership belongs to you?" she asked evenly. He frowned. "That's not what I mean." "It's what you imply." He stood and walked toward the kitchen, pouring himself water. "You're making this adversarial," he said. "I'm making it clear." He turned to face her. "Why does it matter so much that you're seen a certain way? Why does it matter so much that I'm not?" She countered. Silence stretched between them. He exhaled slowly. "I think I could do better in terms of alignment." There it was again, clearer this time. Not implied, stated. Joan didn't raise her voice. "Better," she repeated softly. "Yes. In what way?" "With someone who compliments my trajectory publicly." She absorbed the sentence carefully. "You mean someone visible?" "Yes." "You think I'm not ambitious?" He hesitated. "I think you're comfortable." The word landed heavier than before. Comfortable. She walked toward him slowly. "You think I'm ordinary," she said quietly. "I didn't say that. You don't have to." He shook his head. "You don't build anything." The sentence came out sharper than he intended. She stopped moving. "Built?" she repeated. "Yes. I built this firm. You inherited it. I expanded it. And you believe I haven't built anything?" He opened his mouth to respond, stopped because he didn't know. He had never asked. She moved back toward the table and pulled out a chair, sitting down deliberately. "You've never asked me what I own," she said calmly. "I assumed." "Yes," she interrupted gently. "You assumed." He sat across from her. "You do consulting?" She held his gaze steadily. "I invest casually, strategically." "In what?" "Technology, commercial real estate, logistics." He blinked. "Logistics?" "Yes." He leaned forward slightly. "How much?" She tilted her head. "Enough?" "That's vague." "It's private." He stared at her. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "Because you never asked." The sentence landed clean, not dramatic, not accusatory, factual. He stood and paced once across the dining area. "If you've been building something significant, why keep it hidden?" "It isn't hidden. It's not visible. Not visible to you." He stopped walking. "What does that mean?" "It means you were never curious." He opened his mouth, closed it. Because curiosity requires humility, and humility requires vulnerability. He had not positioned himself to be vulnerable with her. He had positioned himself to lead, to define, to narrate, And now she was stepping outside that narration. "You're doing this to compete," he said quietly. "I don't compete with my husband." "Then what is this?" "Correction." "Correction of what?" "Perception." He looked unsettled. "You think I've misjudged you?" "I know you have." Silence again, heavy, honest. He moved closer to her. "Do you want the spotlight?" "No." "Then what do you want?" "Respect." The word carried weight, not ego, not applause. Respect. He studied her carefully. "You have it?" "No," she said softly. "I have affection. I have comfort. I have presentation. And that's not enough?" "Not when it replaces recognition." He swallowed. "Recognition for what?" "For standing beside you, without leaning." He paused. "You never leaned?" "Not once." The certainty in her tone unsettled him more than anger would have. He sank into the chair across from her. "You think I don't see you. I think you see what's convenient. That's unfair, is it?" He looked down at the speech draft. Alignment, vision, execution. He had built a narrative around himself, and she had allowed it to stand unchallenged. Until now. "You said you could do better," she reminded him quietly. "I didn't mean it that way." "How did you mean it?" He hesitated. "I meant alignment in ambition." She nodded slowly. "And you think I lack ambition?" "I think you lack visible ambition. And visible ambition matters more." "In my world, yes." She leaned back in her chair. "Then your world is smaller than you think." The sentence was not loud, but it was definitive. He looked at her differently now, not dismissively, not casually, seriously. "If you're building something at scale," he said slowly, "why not tell me?" "Because I wanted to be loved without it." He froze. The honesty caught him off guard. "I didn't want my value measured against capital," she continued calmly. "I wanted it recognized in character." He stared at her. "And you think I failed at that?" "I think you confused silence with absence." The house felt still. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just clarity. She stood and walked toward the staircase. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To rest, Joan." She turned slightly. "Yes?" "If you've built something significant, why now?" She looked at him steadily. "Because you said you could do better." He didn't have a response. Not a polished one, not a strategic one, just silence. Upstairs. She closed the bedroom door quietly, not as a barrier, as a boundary. Downstairs, Thompson remained seated. The speech lay unfinished in front of him. For the first time in years, he questioned something deeply uncomfortable. What if he had underestimated the one person who stood closest to him? And what if that underestimation had cost him more than he realized? The ballroom was 2 days away. The guests confirmed. The presentation scheduled. He believed he was stepping into celebration. He didn't realize he was stepping into revelation. The night of the anniversary arrived with precision. Downtown Dallas shimmered under a clear Texas sky. The ballroom entrance glowed with curated elegance. Valets moved efficiently. Guests arrived in tailored suits and polished confidence. 7 years. Thompson stepped out of the car first, adjusting his cufflinks as cameras flashed lightly near the entrance. Joan followed. Emerald silk, minimal jewelry, composed, not performing, present. They paused briefly at the entrance for photographs. 7 years of excellence, a reporter said as they approached. Thompson smiled smoothly. 7 years of disciplined growth. "And what's next?" the reporter asked. "Expansion," he replied. "Strategic alignment." Alignment again. Joan held her posture steady. Inside, the ballroom gleamed under chandeliers. Round tables draped in white linen. A stage positioned at the front. A large presentation screen rested behind the podium. Soft jazz played near the bar. Investors from Houston, Austin, and Dallas circulated with controlled enthusiasm. Thompson moved naturally from cluster to cluster, shaking hands, receiving congratulations. Joan remained near him, greeting guests politely. An executive approached them. "Thompson, impressive trajectory these past 7 years." "Thank you," he replied confidently. The executive turned to Joan. "And how have you enjoyed the journey?" Joan opened her mouth. "She's been my rock," Thompson said lightly. "Rock. Stable, supportive, not structural." Joan smiled gently. "I've observed quite a bit," she added calmly. The executive nodded. "Observation is valuable." "Yes," Joan said evenly. "It is." Thompson shifted the conversation back to growth metrics. As the room filled, Thompson excused himself to review final notes with the event coordinator. Joan stood alone for a moment, scanning the space, the stage, the screen, the arrangement. Everything was moving according to schedule. She checked her phone briefly. A single confirmation message waited. Presentation queued. Timing aligned. She slid the phone back into her clutch. Not nervous, not dramatic, certain. The lights dimmed slightly as guests took their seats. Thompson stepped onto the stage to polite applause. Joan sat at a front table, hands folded calmly. He adjusted the microphone. "Good evening," he began smoothly. "7 years ago, I inherited a firm with potential. Tonight, we celebrate what disciplined execution can achieve." The room listened attentively. He spoke about early acquisitions, strategic pivots, calculated risk. Applause punctuated key moments. "And none of this," he continued, "would be possible without alignment." There it was, alignment. He gestured toward Joan. "My wife has supported me every step of the way." Support. The word echoed gently through the room. Polite applause followed. Joan stood briefly, smiling with composure. She sat again. Her heart did not race. Her breathing remained steady, because support had never been the full story. As Thompson continued speaking, Joan's eyes moved subtly toward the presentation screen. Still dark, still waiting. He concluded his speech with confidence. "To growth," he said, raising a glass. "To vision." Applause filled the ballroom. He stepped off the stage to congratulations and handshakes. Music resumed softly. Guests rose from their seats to mingle. The formal portion was complete. But the night was not. A few minutes later, the ballroom lights dimmed again. Subtle, not dramatic. Guests paused, turning their attention toward the screen. Thompson glanced toward the event coordinator, mildly confused. "This wasn't on the schedule," he murmured. Joan remained seated, still, composed. The screen illuminated. A corporate logo appeared, not Thompson's. The logo of a rapidly expanding Texas-based logistics firm. Murmurs moved through the room. Investors leaned forward slightly. A representative stepped onto the side stage. "Good evening. We appreciate the opportunity to share an important expansion announcement regarding statewide infrastructure growth." Thompson folded his arms, curious. The presentation began. Revenue charts, growth projections, expansion maps, extending from Houston into Austin and Dallas corridors. Investors exchanged quiet looks. "This firm has outperformed projections for 3 consecutive fiscal cycles," the presenter continued. Thompson nodded faintly. Analytical. Then the slide changed. Ownership. Breakdown. The room grew still. Major equity stakeholder, Joan. Her name appeared clearly in professional lettering at the center of the screen. Not exaggerated, not stylized. Documented. Verified. The presenter continued calmly. Joan entered early-stage funding rounds several years ago, providing critical capital during pre-expansion phases. Several investors turned simultaneously, some toward the screen, some toward Joan, some toward Thompson. The presenter advanced to the next slide. Projected valuation, comparable to major regional holdings. Substantial, independent, legitimate. Thompson did not move immediately. He stared at the screen, then at Joan, then back at the screen. His expression did not collapse. It recalibrated. He processed numbers instinctively. Scale, timing, strategic entry. He recognized competence when he saw it. What unsettled him was proximity. She had been sitting beside him for 7 years, and he had never asked. Investors began approaching Joan. "Pre-expansion entry?" one asked. "Yes," she replied evenly. "You anticipated state contract movement?" "I studied regulatory patterns." "You structured equity privately?" "Yes." Her tone remained calm, measured, professional. No triumph, no spectacle, just clarity. Across the room, Thompson stood in silence. He had built his identity on being the sharpest mind in the room. Tonight he discovered he had married one. An older investor approached Thompson gently. "I didn't realize Joan was involved at that level." Thompson forced a controlled smile. "Neither did I." The honesty slipped out before polish could catch it. The presentation concluded to composed applause, not explosive, not chaotic. Real rooms don't gasp, they adjust, and the room had adjusted. Attention shifted, respect recalculated, perception corrected. Joan stood slowly as another executive approached her. "Why keep it quiet?" the executive asked. She smiled faintly. "I value peace, and now," she replied softly, I value clarity. Across the ballroom, Thompson remained still, not humiliated, not exposed publicly, educated. His earlier words echoed in his mind: comfortable, cute, alignment. He had framed her as support. She had revealed herself as structure. The music resumed lightly. Guests returned to conversations, but the tone had shifted. Some approached Joan directly. Others nodded at her with new awareness. Thompson finally began walking toward her, not rushed, measured, each step recalculating the narrative he believed he controlled. When he reached her, their eyes met. No anger, no accusation, just understanding. "You never told me," he said quietly. "You never asked," she replied. The sentence landed clean, unavoidable. The ballroom glowed as before. Chandeliers steady, glasses clinking. But something fundamental had changed. Thompson believed he was celebrating 7 years of leadership. He now understood. He was standing beside an equal, and equality demands humility. The terrace conversation was approaching, and it would determine whether alignment meant ego or partnership. The ballroom did not erupt. It recalculated. That was the difference between spectacle and consequence. As the final slide faded from the screen, applause moved through the room, measured, professional, controlled, not for drama, for validation. Joan stood with quiet composure as the presenter stepped down from the stage. Her name no longer belonged to proximity. It belonged to ownership. Across the room, investors who had previously clustered around Thompson shifted their trajectory slightly, not abruptly, strategically, because capital follows clarity. And clarity had just entered the room. A senior investor from Austin approached Joan first. "Early-stage logistics funding?" he asked. "Yes." "What triggered your entry point?" "Undervalued infrastructure corridors," she replied evenly. "Most firms ignored secondary transport routes. I didn't." "You anticipated state-level expansion?" "I anticipated growth where others saw delay." The investor nodded slowly. "Bold, prepared," she corrected gently. Behind her, Thompson remained still, not excluded, but no longer singular. Another executive joined. "You structured through private holdings?" "Yes." "Independent capital?" "Yes." "You didn't leverage Thompson's firm?" "No." The answer was clean. No defensive tone, no embellishment, just fact. The executive glanced briefly toward Thompson, then back to Joan. "Impressive." Joan inclined her head slightly. "Strategic." Thompson finally moved forward. His posture remained controlled, his expression neutral, but his internal recalibration was visible in subtle ways. The way his jaw tightened briefly, the way his gaze lingered on the valuation slide still glowing faintly on the screen. He approached the presenter first. "I wasn't aware this announcement was scheduled for tonight," he said calmly. The presenter smiled politely. It aligned well with the investor audience. Aligned. The word echoed. Thompson nodded. Once. "Yes, it certainly did." He stepped back, because he understood something clearly now. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This was timing. Strategic timing. And timing requires foresight. Back near the front tables, Joan continued answering questions. Not eagerly, not dramatically, competently. An investor asked, "How long have you been scaling this?" 7 years, she replied. The symmetry was not lost on those listening. 7 years. The same length as her marriage. 7 years of quiet capital positioning. 7 years of watching Thompson build publicly. 7 years of building privately. Thompson approached her finally. The surrounding investors paused subtly. He did not interrupt her mid-sentence. He waited. That alone signaled change. When she finished speaking, he addressed her directly. "You entered pre-expansion phases personally?" "Yes." "How much exposure?" "Calculated exposure." His lips pressed briefly into a thin line. "I underestimated the scale." She held his gaze steadily. "You underestimated my capacity." The surrounding investors pretended not to hear, but they heard. The room resumed movement, but the energy had shifted. Thompson noticed it. Questions once directed exclusively at him now included her. Analysts referenced the logistics growth alongside his firm's performance. Capital conversations expanded, not replaced. Expanded for the first time in years. He was not the sole gravitational force in the room, and the realization did not humiliate him. It unsettled him, because equality challenges hierarchy. An older board member approached Thompson quietly. "You married well." he said with a small smile. Thompson's response was automatic. Yes, but the word carried new weight. Not because she elevated him, because she stood independently. The distinction mattered. Joan excused herself briefly and moved toward the side of the ballroom near the windows. She did not flee. She paused. The city lights stretched below in calm order. Her phone vibrated once. A message from the logistics team. Press inquiries incoming. She turned the screen off. No celebration, no gloating, just confirmation. Thompson joined her moments later. Not confrontational, measured. You timed this, he said quietly. Yes, for tonight. Yes. Why? She looked at him steadily. Because perception needed correction. He inhaled slowly. You could have told me privately. I tried. He hesitated. You never said it directly. You never asked. Directly. Silence. Honest. Clean. Behind them, laughter resumed. Clinking glasses. Muted conversations. The event continued, but the center had shifted, and Thompson knew it. He had built his public identity on being the primary architect of his life. Tonight, he discovered he had been narrating only half of it. An investor approached again. Thompson, he said politely, this logistics play is strong. Are you planning integration? Thompson glanced at Joan briefly. Integration discussions would involve her, he replied. Not my wife. Not support her. The investor nodded approvingly. Smart. Joan met Thompson's eyes. The shift was subtle, but real. More conversations followed. Capital inquiries. Expansion questions. Valuation recalculations. And through it all, Joan remained composed. No dramatic speeches. No public declarations. She did not seize the microphone. She allowed documentation to speak. Because numbers don't argue, they confirm. Eventually, the music softened again. The formal portion of the event concluded. Guests began dispersing gradually. Some lingered longer than planned, because curiosity had replaced certainty. Thompson stood near the edge of the ballroom, watching Joan speak confidently with a group of investors, not dominating, not overshadowing, collaborating. He replayed his own words from weeks earlier. Comfortable, cute, alignment. He had mistaken restraint for limitation. He had mistaken privacy for absence. He had mistaken silence for simplicity. And underestimation is expensive, especially when directed at the person closest to you. When Joan finished her conversation, she walked toward him slowly. No rush, no performance. Shall we? She asked gently. He nodded. They moved toward the terrace doors together, not as spectacle, not as fracture, as recalibration. The Dallas skyline waited outside, and the conversation that would follow would determine whether this marriage adjusted or collapsed under its own assumptions. The terrace doors closed softly behind them. The music from inside the ballroom faded into a distant hum. Dallas stretched out below, towers lit in disciplined symmetry, highways flowing in quiet lines of red and white. For a moment, neither spoke. Thompson rested his hands lightly on the railing. Joan stood a few steps away, the night air moving gently against her silk dress. He broke the silence first. How long? He asked quietly. 7 years, she replied. He nodded once, absorbing it. Before we met? Yes. Before we married? Yes. And you never thought to tell me? She looked at him steadily. You never thought to ask? The sentence landed again. Not sharp, not dramatic, precise. He exhaled slowly. I thought I knew you. You knew parts of me. Why keep the rest separate? It wasn't separate, she said calmly. It was independent. He turned toward her fully now. You don't see how that feels? How what feels? Like I've been outpaced. She studied him. This isn't a race. It feels like one. That's because you've been competing alone. His jaw tightened slightly. I wasn't competing with you. No, she said softly. You were competing with perception. Silence stretched between them. He stepped closer. When you saw your name on that screen tonight, he said carefully, what did you feel? Clarity. Not satisfaction? No. Not vindication? No. Why not? Because this was never about humiliating you. He searched her expression. Then what was it about? Respect. The word carried weight in the cool night air. You have my respect, he insisted. She tilted her head slightly. Do the first? Yes. Then why did you reduce me publicly? I didn't reduce you. Lifestyle management, she replied calmly. He closed his eyes briefly. That wasn't reads a lot. He swallowed. You think like an analyst. That's cute. Each phrase delivered evenly, not as attack. As record, he looked away toward the skyline. I didn't realize. You didn't want to. That hit harder, because it carried truth. He rested both hands on the railing. I built my identity around being the architect, he said slowly. I know. I expanded that firm. Yes, I carried risk. So did I. He turned sharply. You never said that. You never asked. The repetition now felt heavier, not defensive, inevitable. He faced her fully. Do you know what tonight did to me? What? It made me question everything I thought I understood. That's not a bad thing. It's destabilizing. Only if your foundation was incomplete. He absorbed that. I thought you were comfortable. I am. Because of me. She shook her head slightly. Beside you. The distinction echoed again. Beside. Not because. He ran a hand through his hair, breaking his usual polished composure. I thought I was the primary force in this marriage. You were the loudest. The honesty stung. Is that how you see me? He asked quietly. No, she said. That's how you positioned yourself. Silence. Real. Unavoidable. He leaned back against the railing now. When I said I could do better in alignment, he began. Yes, she replied. I didn't mean better, as in superior. You meant visible. Yes. And you equated visible with valuable. He didn't argue, because she was right. Why didn't you confront me earlier? He asked. I did. Not like this. Because I wanted you to see me without needing proof. He stared at her. And now I'm done shrinking. The sentence was calm, final, not hostile, resolved. He stepped closer again. Did you ever doubt me? He asked. No, not even tonight. No. Why? Because I know what you built. He swallowed. And what did you build? She held his gaze. Security. Leverage. Independence. For yourself. For us. He looked confused. For us? Yes. He searched her expression. Even when you felt reduced? Yes. Why? Because love doesn't disappear when respect wavers. That hit differently. Love remained. But respect required correction. The terrace grew quieter as guests began leaving inside. You could have embarrassed me, he said finally. I didn't. You could have positioned it as competition. I didn't. You could have framed it as exposure. I didn't. He looked at her closely. You framed it as expansion. Yes. Why? Because I wasn't trying to beat you, he exhaled slowly. I underestimated you. Yes. I minimized you. Yes. I confused your silence for absence. Yes. The acknowledgments stacked one by one, heavy, necessary. He stepped even closer now. I owe you more than an apology. Yes, she said softly. What do I owe you? Recognition. For what? For standing beside you without leaning. He nodded slowly. And if I give it, it shouldn't be given, she replied. It should be understood. That required something he had avoided for years. Humility. He looked out over the city lights again. I built my confidence on being the smartest person in the room. And tonight, she asked gently, I realized I married someone just as sharp. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate it. She simply stood steady. And that unsettled you, she said. Yes. Why? Because it forced me to share the narrative. She let the words settle. Marriage is not narrative control. It is shared authorship. He was beginning to see that. Are we broken? He asked quietly. She considered the question carefully. No, he exhaled. We're corrected? The word lingered. Corrected, not destroyed, not fractured, adjusted. He reached for her hand slowly, not possessively, cautiously. She didn't pull away. I don't want alignment, he said quietly. You don't? No. What do you want? Equality. The word felt unfamiliar on his tongue. She studied him carefully. Equality requires humility. I know. Can you handle that? He didn't answer immediately. He actually thought, yes, he said finally, if I choose it. And will you? He met her eyes. Yes. For the first time that night, there was no polish in his voice, no branding, no positioning, just decision. The terrace doors opened behind them briefly as a staff member passed through. Inside, the ballroom had resumed its soft hum. Outside, clarity had settled. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of parallel building, 7 years of assumption, corrected in one documented slide. He squeezed her hand gently. You were never ordinary, he said. I never thought I was, she replied calmly. He nodded. I did. Yes. And that was my mistake. Yes, the honesty no longer felt defensive. It felt grounding. The night air remained cool, the city steady, the event successful, but redefined. Thompson had celebrated 7 years of expansion. He now understood he was entering a different phase. Shared leadership, shared visibility, shared narrative, and humility would determine whether that shift endured. By morning, the ballroom moment had moved beyond the ballroom. Dallas business blogs carried the headline first. Joan's name appeared beneath it, not as spouse, not as accessory, as investor, principal stakeholder, strategic partner. The language was measured, professional, respectful. Thompson read the article at the kitchen counter while Joan poured coffee. He didn't comment immediately. He read it twice, then once more. They quoted you, he said finally. Yes. You handled it carefully. Yes. He set the tablet down slowly. They're calling you disciplined. She smiled faintly. That's accurate. He studied her for a moment, not dismissively, not competitively, thoughtfully. By noon, larger outlets had picked up the story. Houston-based financial publications emphasized early-stage foresight. Austin analysts referenced infrastructure timing. Dallas media framed it as strategic positioning within Texas logistics growth, not sensational, not scandalous, substantive. And in each article, Joan's name stood independently. No mention of supportive wife, no references to philanthropy or domestic stability. Just ownership, just foresight, just capital. Thompson's phone buzzed throughout the afternoon. Congratulatory messages, curious inquiries, integration proposals. He responded professionally, but there was a difference in his tone. Measured, deliberate, aware. At one point, he walked into the living room where Joan was reviewing documents. They're asking if our firms will collaborate, he said. Our firms, she repeated gently. He paused. Yes, not my firm. Our firms. The correction was subtle, intentional. She nodded. Slowly. Collaboration depends on terms. He smiled faintly. Of course it does. For the first time in weeks, the exchange felt like partnership, not positioning. Later that week, they attended a small investor breakfast in downtown Dallas. The atmosphere was more restrained than the anniversary gala. Private, focused. As they entered, an executive approached Thompson first. Congratulations on the event, the executive said. Thank you, Thompson replied. The executive then turned toward Joan. And congratulations to you. Thank you, she replied evenly. Thompson did not interject. He did not redefine her. He did not simplify her. Instead, when another guest joined the conversation and asked for introductions, Thompson spoke clearly. This is Joan. She leads strategic logistics expansion across Texas. No embellishment, no exaggeration, just truth. The executive nodded with genuine interest. I'd like to hear your perspective on regional scalability, he said to Joan. She responded calmly, outlining regulatory friction points and phased infrastructure modeling. Thompson listened, not as correction, as participant. And when she finished, he added thoughtfully, her early-stage timing positioned the firm ahead of state-level adjustments, not possessive, not competitive, collaborative. The shift was visible, not dramatic, intentional. After the breakfast meeting, they walked back to their car. You didn't interrupt me, she observed lightly. He glanced at her. I noticed, and I've been interrupting you for years. Yes. He unlocked the car. I didn't realize how often. You realize now. Yes. The acknowledgement was not defensive. It was sober. Over the next several days, invitations shifted. Panels that previously requested Thompson alone began extending dual invitations. Interviews asked for joint commentary. Thompson noticed how the framing evolved. Not power couple, not spectacle, parallel leadership. He could have resisted it. He could have guarded his narrative. Instead, he leaned into adjustment. At a televised interview the following week, the host asked, Did you know about Joan's logistics position all along? Thompson smiled slightly. I knew she was capable. I underestimated the scale. The honesty surprised even the host. And how does that change your dynamic? It corrects it, he replied. Joan sat beside him, composed. Correction, not competition, not conflict, recognition. At home that evening, the atmosphere felt different, less formal, more aware. Thompson set his phone aside deliberately. No interruptions tonight, he said. She looked up from her tablet. Progress. He smiled faintly. I've bbeen thinking about something you said. Which part? She asked. That you wanted to be loved without capital. She held his gaze. Yes, I did love you without it. I know. But I valued you differently. Because of it. Yes. He leaned back slightly. That's difficult to admit. It's necessary, she replied. He nodded slowly. I built my confidence around being the primary force. And now? She asked. Now I'm learning to share force. The phrasing was imperfect, but sincere. Over the following weeks, the public narrative stabilized. Joan's logistics expansion progressed steadily. Thompson's firm continued its trajectory, but internally, something deeper shifted. He began asking her questions without framing them as corrections. What's your view on secondary corridor investment? How are you mitigating contract risk? Would you structure it differently? And she answered without filtering her tone to soften his ego. Direct, precise, equal. One evening at dinner, he paused mid-conversation. You never leaned, he said quietly. No, not once. No. He studied her expression carefully. I assumed you did. Yes. That was arrogant. Yes. The repetition no longer felt confrontational. It felt grounding. At a conference in Austin 2 months later, they were introduced together. The moderator said, We're joined by Thompson and Joan, 2 leaders shaping Texas infrastructure. Thompson stepped forward first. I'd like Joan to open this discussion, he said. The room shifted slightly. He wasn't deferring out of performance. He was adjusting. Joan spoke calmly about strategic patience and disciplined capital entry. When she finished, the applause felt balanced, not disproportionate, balanced. On the drive home that night, Thompson looked at her thoughtfully. You were patient with me, he said. Yes. Why? Because I knew who I was. And if you hadn't, then tonight would have ended differently. He nodded slowly. I'm glad it didn't. So am I. The answer was simple, honest. Recognition did not arrive with fireworks. It settled gradually, in tone, in language, in posture. Thompson no longer introduced her as support. He no longer reduced her expertise. He no longer framed alignment as hierarchy. And Joan no longer allowed silence to replace acknowledgement. They did not become louder. They became clearer. One evening, as they sat on their patio watching the Dallas skyline, Thompson spoke softly. I mistook your grace for limitation. Yes, I mistook your privacy for lack of scale. Yes, I mistook your patience for dependence. She turned toward him. And now? Now I understand you were building beside me the entire time. She nodded once. That's all I ever wanted you to see. The city lights flickered steadily below. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just steady, like their marriage. Corrected, not perfect, not untouched, but stronger for the clarity. 3 weeks after the ballroom revelation, the house in Dallas felt quieter in a different way, not distant, not strained, grounded. Thompson had cleared his schedule that evening intentionally. No panels, no investor dinner, no late calls, just dinner at home. He stood in the kitchen earlier than usual, sleeves rolled, reviewing a simple recipe Joan once mentioned liking. Nothing extravagant, no performance, no catering staff. When Joan walked in from her office upstairs, she paused. You cooked? She asked lightly. I attempted to, he replied. That's either brave or dangerous. We'll find out. They sat across from each other at the dining table. No phones, no interruptions, no positioning. Just 2 people who had built 7 years together and were now rebuilding the tone of it. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Thompson leaned forward slightly. I need to say something clearly, he began. Joan didn't interrupt. I underestimated you. She held his gaze. Yes. I didn't just misunderstand your work. I diminished it. The word was deliberate. Diminished. Yes, she said softly. I reduced you publicly because it made me feel secure privately. That honesty did not sound polished. It sounded exposed. She nodded once. I know. He swallowed. I wrapped it in charm, humor, framing. But it was still reduction. Yes, I'm sorry. The words hung between them. Not rushed, not rehearsed. Real. She did not respond immediately. He waited. Because apology without space is performance. After a moment, she spoke. I needed you to see me without proof, she said quietly. I know. But when you didn't, I had to show you. I know. I didn't want to. He exhaled slowly. I forced that. Yes. He leaned back slightly, looking at his hands. I've spent my life building leverage, he said. I know. I built confidence around being decisive, certain, ahead, yes, but certainty became assumption. She didn't interrupt. I assumed you were comfortable because of me. Yes. I assumed your silence meant simplicity. Yes. I assumed I was the larger force. Her voice remained calm. You were louder? He almost smiled at the truth of it. Yes. He looked at her again. You were never ordinary. I never thought I was. I did. Yes. The repetition no longer felt like accusation. It felt like record. He leaned forward again. I need to ask something. Ask. Why didn't you resent me? She considered the question carefully. I did, she answered honestly. He blinked. You did? Quietly. For how long? For as long as you kept introducing me smaller than I was. He absorbed that. And you stayed? Yes. Why? Because I loved you. The answer was simple, not dramatic. Just true. And love doesn't disappear when ego shows up, she continued, but it does demand correction. He nodded slowly. I'm correcting. Yes, but correction isn't temporary, she added. It's habit. I know. Do you? Yes. He held her gaze steadily. I'm learning to ask instead of assume. She studied him carefully. Then ask. He took a breath. What exactly did you build? Her expression softened slightly. A logistics stake that entered pre-expansion when most firms hesitated. How did you know? I studied state-level infrastructure delays, and the real estate, undervalued corridors tied to transportation access, and technology, early funding in scalable platforms before mainstream adoption. He listened without interruption. And you did all of that alone? No. With advisors? Yes. With caution? Always. He nodded slowly. You were never behind me. No. You were beside me. Yes. The word settled differently now. Not as confrontation, as understanding. He pushed his plate aside gently. I don't want alignment the way I defined it. How do you define it now? She asked. As equal presence. And equal respect? Yes. Publicly? Yes. Privately? Especially privately. She held his gaze a moment longer. And if rooms shift? She asked. Then we shift with them. And if attention splits? Then we handle it. And if you're not the primary voice? He didn't hesitate this time. Then I listen. The answer carried weight, because it required him to release control. She leaned back slightly. I didn't need applause, she said. I know. I needed acknowledgement. I understand. And acknowledgement isn't about money. It's about recognition. Yes. He nodded. I see you. The sentence was not loud, but it was anchored. She watched his expression carefully, looking for polish, finding none, just intention. After dinner, they moved to the patio outside. Dallas glowed steadily beyond the railing. The air was calm. You know what hurt the most? She asked quietly. What? When you called my thinking cute. He winced slightly. I remember. You laughed. Yes? I didn't. He looked at her. I didn't realize how small that made you feel. It wasn't small, she corrected gently. It was dismissive. He nodded slowly. I won't do that again. I know. You know? Yes. How? Because you're uncomfortable right now. He almost laughed. That obvious? Yes. And that's good? Yes. Why? Because growth feels uncomfortable. He looked out at the skyline. I thought growth was expansion. It is, she replied. But sometimes expansion happens internally. Silence followed, comfortable this time, not strained. Thompson finally spoke again. You didn't expose me. No, you corrected me. Yes. And you could have humiliated me. I didn't need to. He nodded slowly. Thank you. She studied him carefully. For what? For choosing clarity over revenge. She smiled faintly. I wasn't trying to win. I know. You were trying to be seen. Yes. He reached for her hand gently. I see you. The second time it sounded less like statement and more like commitment. She squeezed his hand lightly. That's all I needed. The night settled around them, 7 years behind. A new phase ahead. Not louder, not grander, clearer. And clarity, once earned, is difficult to lose. Change is rarely loud. It shows up in patterns, in tone, in timing. 2 months after the anniversary event, the shift in their marriage was no longer theoretical. It was practiced. Thompson no longer walked into rooms alone by default. He asked first, are you attending? Do you want to speak? What's your view before I answer? Not as performance, as habit. And habit is where correction becomes character. They stood together in a conference hall in Austin, invited to speak on infrastructure scalability across Texas. The moderator introduced them carefully. Today we're joined by Thompson and Joan, two leaders shaping investment strategy and logistics expansion across the state. No qualifier, no hierarchy, equal framing. Thompson stepped toward the microphone first. Before I speak on capital structuring, he said calmly, I'd like Joan to outline the infrastructure positioning that made this expansion possible. A small ripple of attention moved through the room. He had not deferred, he had prioritized. Joan stepped forward without hesitation. She did not thank him publicly for the introduction. She did not dramatize the moment. She spoke. Most firms evaluate logistics from the perspective of central hubs, she began. We evaluated secondary corridors, the overlooked routes where contract flexibility and scalability intersect. She moved through data clearly. No exaggeration, no overstatement. When she finished, the applause felt balanced. Not louder for her, not louder for him. Balanced. Thompson followed with capital structure commentary, referencing her modeling without hesitation. As Joan outlined, he said smoothly, timing state-level friction allowed us to allocate risk efficiently. Not my modeling, not my insight. Shared. After the panel, several executives approached them. One addressed Thompson first. You two operate seamlessly, he observed. Thompson smiled slightly. We operate equally. The executive nodded. That's rare. Yes, Joan replied calmly. But it shouldn't be. The statement carried no edge, just truth. In the weeks that followed, their calendars shifted from parallel scheduling to coordinated strategy. They didn't merge their firms impulsively. They discussed collaboration carefully. What benefits the structure? Joan would ask. What preserves independence? Thompson would counter. Not territorial, intentional. One evening in their home office, documents spread across the table. Thompson paused mid-review. I used to think shared visibility would dilute me, he admitted. And now? She asked. Now I see it strengthens the narrative. She tilted her head slightly. Marriage isn't narrative. He smiled faintly. I know. But public perception matters. And privately? She prompted. Privately, I don't need to lead every room. She studied him carefully. Is that difficult? Yes. Why? Because I've equated leadership with control. And now? I'm learning. Leadership can mean listening. She nodded once. That's growth. The most visible shift came in small introductions. At a Houston investor roundtable, Thompson extended his hand toward Joan during introductions. This is Joan, he said clearly, principal stakeholder in Texas logistics expansion and long-term infrastructure strategist. No softening, no humor, no framing her as support, just clarity. Joan noticed the difference not in volume, but in certainty. Later, in the car, she asked quietly, why that phrasing? Because it's accurate, he replied. And before I used language that made me larger. She didn't respond immediately. Then she said, language reveals belief. Yes. And what do you believe now? That partnership is leverage. She looked at him. Leverage? Yes. Strength multiplied. The phrasing wasn't romantic. It was strategic, but it was honest. One evening, they attended a smaller dinner with long-term investors in Dallas. The conversation turned toward decision-making under pressure. An executive asked, who makes the final call when you disagree? Thompson glanced at Joan. We evaluate data, he said. Then we decide. Together? The executive pressed. Yes, Joan answered calmly. And if one of you sees risk, the other doesn't? The executive continued. Then we pause. Thompson replied. I've learned that haste isn't strength. Joan looked at him briefly. That sentence mattered, because haste had once defined him, and she had once softened it quietly, without acknowledgement. Now, he acknowledged it openly. At home, the shift felt even more grounded. Breakfast conversations no longer sounded like commentary. They sounded like collaboration. What's your read on European volatility? He asked one morning. Temporary contraction in secondary tech sectors, she replied. But long-term infrastructure remains steady. He nodded thoughtfully. I agree. No dismissive laughter. No cute. Just agreement. And when he disagreed, he asked for clarification. "Walk me through that." She did, and he listened. There were still moments of adjustment. Leadership habits don't disappear overnight. One afternoon, during a call with a Houston developer, Thompson began answering a logistics question automatically. He paused mid-sentence. "Actually," he said, glancing toward Joan, "Joan should address that." The developer shifted attention immediately. Joan answered clearly. After the call ended, Thompson leaned back in his chair. "That used to feel threatening," he admitted. "What does it feel like now?" she asked. "Relieving." She smiled faintly. "Because you don't have to carry everything." "Yes." He looked at her carefully. "And you never needed me to know." The acknowledgement no longer carried tension. It carried respect. One night, as they stood again on their patio overlooking Dallas, Thompson spoke softly. "I thought equality would diminish me." "And?" she asked. "It expanded me." She studied his expression. "Why?" "Because I'm no longer protecting a narrative." "And what are you protecting now?" "Us." The word felt different now. Not possessive, protective, balanced. The transformation was not theatrical. There were no dramatic declarations, no grand gestures, just consistency, language corrected, tone adjusted, presence shared. Joan no longer felt reduced in rooms. Thompson no longer felt threatened by her competence. They did not compete. They collaborated. And in collaboration, they discovered something neither had articulated before. Respect is not automatic in love. It is practiced. Every introduction, every conversation, every decision. And practice over time becomes culture. Texas skies don't change suddenly. They shift slowly. Morning heat builds before noon realizes it's summer. Storm clouds gather quietly long before thunder announces their arrival. Highways stretch wide, but the distance between two exits can still feel longer than expected. Marriage is like that. It doesn't break in noise. It shifts in tone. 7 years into their union, Joan and Thompson didn't rebuild from destruction. They recalibrated from assumption. An assumption, when left unchecked, grows quietly. Months after the ballroom revelation, their life no longer felt like positioning. It felt intentional. One Sunday afternoon, they drove down to Houston together. Not for business, not for investors, for barbecue, for music, drifting through open windows, for folding chairs under shade trees. Thompson stepped out of the car this time without hesitation. No guarded posture, no careful scanning. Joan's cousin spotted them first. "Well now," her cousin said with a playful grin. "Y'all look aligned." Thompson smiled. "We are." Her cousin raised an eyebrow at Joan. "You happy?" Joan didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." The answer felt grounded, not defensive, not cautious, secure. Later that afternoon, as music played softly and laughter carried across the yard, Thompson sat beside Joan on folding chairs beneath the same oak tree. "You built this long before me," he said quietly. "Yes." "And you never tried to use it." "No." "Why?" "Because I didn't need to." He nodded slowly. "I thought power was about visibility, and now I know it's about stability." She smiled faintly. "That took you 7 years." "Yes." "In one slide." He almost laughed. "Yes." But it wasn't the slide alone that corrected him. It was her refusal to shrink, her refusal to argue theatrically, her decision to let truth speak without spectacle. Back in Dallas, they returned to their routine, but it no longer felt routine. It felt shared. At investor meetings, they sat side by side, not as ornament, not as image, as equal forces. When Thompson introduced her, his voice carried certainty. When Joan spoke, he listened fully. There were no more accidental reductions, no more soft dismissals disguised as charm. And when tension surfaced, as it inevitably does in ambitious lives, they addressed it directly. "Am I assuming?" he would ask. "Yes," she would reply, and he would adjust. "Am the first shrinking?" She would ask. "No," he would answer, and she would stand firm. Growth didn't make them louder. It made them clearer. One evening, as they sat in their living room reviewing potential collaboration terms between their firms, Thompson paused. "There's something I need to admit," he said. She looked up. "I was proud of marrying someone who didn't need my money." "Yes." "But I also felt safer believing you needed my platform." She held his gaze. "And now I know you chose me." The word mattered. Chose, not leaned, not relied. Chose, and that changes everything, he added. "Yes," she said softly. It does. Their marriage didn't become perfect. It became aware. Aware of language. Aware of tone. Aware of ego. Aware of equality. And awareness is stronger than illusion. Thompson learned something that night in the ballroom that no business magazine could teach him. Underestimating the person closest to you doesn't protect your strength. It exposes your insecurity. And Joan learned something too. Silence is powerful. But clarity is transformative. She had never needed to compete. She needed to be seen, and once she was, everything adjusted. Texas highways still stretch long and wide. Distance still exists between exits. But if you're paying attention, you can change lanes before you miss your turn. Joan and Thompson almost missed theirs. Almost. Because love without respect is temporary. But love corrected by humility, that's durable. If you've ever felt underestimated by someone who should have known you better, if you've ever shrunk yourself to preserve someone else's ego, if you've ever mistaken silence for absence, let this story remind you. You don't have to argue to prove your worth. You don't have to perform to validate your value. And you never have to shrink for someone to feel tall. Respect is not requested. It is demonstrated, and when necessary, revealed. Thank you for being part of Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If this story moved you, press the like button. It helps YouTube share stories like this with more people who need perspective. Comment below. Have you ever been underestimated? And how did you respond? And if you believe in love built on equality, not ego, subscribe and join this growing family. Because sometimes the strongest storms don't destroy anything. They clear the air. And sometimes the person you thought was ordinary was simply patient,